Chris Sewall here, baseball card collector, investor, dealer, in that order. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to take a 1 week break from the high and regular rollers, which I usually put out every Wednesday, alternating. But this morning I was browsing gemrate.com and just kept running into data that I found interesting. And I'll get back to the high and regular rollers next week, but I was sort of inspired to put out a different video today. And for those who don't know, Gemrate is a website that just compiles data mainly on the grading companies. And I think they're sort of growing in importance in the hobby. Just a lot of great data, a fantastic website, and they're not affiliated with the channel in any way. They're not a sponsor. I don't know anybody over there, but just a really, really great resource. And I was just sort of browsing it this morning, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting piece of data. And then went to the next page. I was like, oh yeah, would have never thought of that. And that just kept happening. So I compiled, I think, something like 10 pieces of data. Going to be a lot of charts and graphs in this video. We'll go through each one by one. I'll sort of, give my take on a couple things, and then would love to hear anybody's thoughts on them as well. But before we jump into that, I want to mention I'll be at the Chantilly Card Show this weekend in Chantilly, Virginia at the Dulles Expo Center. I'll be there all 3 days, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I'm set up at a booth. If you want to come by and say hi, or just bring some of your personal collection to show off, or bring some cards you're looking to sell, or just want to swing by and chat and say hi, please do. Always enjoy that. All right, let's check out the data here. And the first chart I wanted to look at is this is the number of cards graded each month by PSA. And it goes back to March of 2021, so we're looking at about 3 years worth of data here. And you can see the bar on the far right, March of 2024. That's the all-time new all-time record for a single month, cards graded by PSA. I mean, setting the all-time record is not uncommon. Basically, it sets the all-time record every other month or so. But just a continued upwards trend. I've made the point before. To me, it's surprising. As for me as a dealer, I feel like there's fewer and fewer cards that it makes financial sense to grade because of the cost of grading and because of the value of graded cards, particularly PSA 9s. So to me, I'm sending in fewer and fewer cards, but obviously the market as a whole has not gone along with me on that, as this arrow just continues to point up, and I've sort of predicted that grading would flatten out, but we are not seeing signs of that. This chart here shows the number of cards graded in each category or sport in the last 30 days. You can see TCG way at the top. More TCG cards get graded now than any individual sport. Now, sports cards as a whole still have a whole lot more than TCG, but just for any individual sport, TCG is more than baseball or football or basketball. Now, baseball is comfortably number 2 here, way ahead of football and basketball. But the baseball, football, basketball order, probably jockeys around a lot, dependent on product release dates and seasons starting and ending and those sort of things. This chart shows the number of cards graded by player over the last week, and C.J. Stroud has the most of Shohei Ohtani, number 2, Victor Wembanyama, Jordan, Anthony Richardson, Jamar Chase. Nothing really surprising going on here. This chart here shows the number of cards graded by player of all time, and actually blacked out the names if anyone wants to try to guess ahead of time who's number 1 or who's top 5 or top 10 or whatever. I'll give it like a 3-second beat here if you want to pause the video and try to guess. Michael Jordan coming in easily at number 1. Griffey, LeBron, Kobe, Ohtani, Jeter, Doncic, Brady. No real surprising names here, but I did find it interesting that Michael Jordan has nearly twice as many cards as the next guy, Ken Griffey Jr. Now, Jordan being number 1, that makes perfect sense, but double the next guy, that seems like a pretty extreme, count difference. I would have thought the gap was a little narrower than that. I also found it interesting that both Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert have more cards graded ever than Patrick Mahomes, even though Patrick Mahomes' rookie was 3 years before theirs. So Mahomes has 3 years more worth of cards, but still Burrow and Herbert have more graded cards. That's certainly because Burrow and Herbert's rookie is 2020, and that was a very overproduced year for sports cards, or football cards in particular. But still, that's sort of surprising. I would have thought Mahomes was ahead of those guys. And let's hear it for some old timers, Nolan Ryan and Mickey Mantle. Mickey Mantle, true vintage. Nolan Ryan, vintage as well. How about them? How about some old time greats here hanging with the youngsters on this top 15, 20 chart? This chart shows the most number of cards graded by each set of all time. And when I first saw this set, I was really surprised by the 2 sets that landed at number 1 and 2. I just would have never predicted there were 1 and 2. Although in hindsight, it does make sense. But I blacked them out again here if you want to try to guess which 2 sets all time have the most number of cards graded. I'll give it 3 seconds if you want to pause the video again. 1986 Fleer basketball and 1952 Topps baseball. And they're actually number 1 and 2 by a distant margin over 2020 Panini Prizm football, which, goes along with the Herbert and Joe Burrow thing we were just talking about. But 86 Fleer basketball and 52 Topps baseball, you don't think of the 86 Fleer Jordan or the 52 Topps Mantle as being like high pop count cards, and they're not. They're very low, they're not low pop count, but they're low pop count compared to modern sets. But the reason these sets are so high is because it makes sense to grade all the commons. There's a lot a lot of set collectors of these sets who want all the cards graded, even the commons. So there's the commons have a lot more pop counts than modern commons today, of course. So these sets are a distant number 1 and 2. You can see all the other sets on this list are ultra modern, ranging from 2018 up to 2023. This chart shows the number of times an individual card has been graded in the last week, so you can see sort of more up-to-date trends. Not a whole lot to say about this chart. The card ending at number 1 sort of random. 2021 Panini Donruss Press Proof Premium Jamar Chase. It's a very sort of random card to have been graded 1,300 times last week, and you can see it's basically the first time it's been graded. It's only been graded 1,349 times ever, and 1,331 of them were last week. I don't really have an explanation for that, but Victor Wembanyama landing 5 times in the top 10. This chart shows the individual cards that have been graded the most number of times ever by PSA, and it's heavily dominated by junk wax era, and specifically junk wax era baseball. Top 5 are all 1980s baseball, late 80s baseball. The top 3, in fact, are all 1989 Ken Griffey Jr. rookies, and the number 1 card is the 1989 Upper Deck Ken Griffey Jr., the only card ever to have been graded into 6 figures by PSA, over 107,000 cards. Now, what's funny is 1989 Upper Deck, that was supposed to be a premium rare product compared to the other sets in 1989. This chart suggests otherwise, and there's many rumors and stories that I've heard over the years as to why that's not the case, and I'm sure some of them have some truth to them. This chart shows the individual cards that have received the most PSA 10s of all time, and this is a very different breakdown of years, as this chart's entirely dominated by ultra modern, almost all 2018 to 2020 product. Look at that, like 18 of the top 20 spots are ultra modern from 2018 to 2020. I've mentioned this before, but the top 5, or I guess the top 4 only, having over 20,000 PSA 10s, that is just an incredible number that would have been completely unheard of a few years ago. I'm going to just pinpoint 2 cards, which I've pinpointed the Gavin Lux before. 2020 Topps Gavin Lux and the 2020 Topps Kyle Lewis. These cards just came out right during the pandemic. Both these players were young, hot, prospects at the time and got way, way mass overgraded. What's funny is the Gavin Lux today in a PSA 10 sells for about $7. Actually, $7 is sort of on the high end. And the Kyle Lewis sells for about $3. Remember, both of these cards are in the top 10 most PSA 10 copied cards of all time. And last thing we'll go over here is something GemRate is doing that I applaud tremendously. Something I've been asking for a long time, and they're doing it here, putting together a universal pop report. So if you want the pop count on the card, you don't have to just go to PSA and just look at PSA or just Beckett or just SGC. You can look at all 4 major grading companies on one chart. They've got it here. I'll run through 3 examples. Here's a 2001 Topps Ichiro rookie. And yeah, you can see the pop counts of all 4 major grading companies in all grades here on one chart, with all sorts of data and percentages you can use in whatever way you see fit. And there's all sorts of data and charts on this you can use. Here's a pie chart of how many times it's been graded by each company. I guess it's not a pie chart, it's a donut chart. But yeah, you can see PSA a little over half, Beckett, maybe at 25%, and then SGC and CGC with small little pieces. Here's like a distribution of the grades for each company. So at the top is PSA. You can see they've given out the most 8s on this card. You can see a spike around 8. For Beckett, there's a spike at, I guess that's 8.5. And yeah, all 4 grading companies basically show a similar pattern there. Second example is CJ Stroud, 2023 Panini Prizm rookie. And same thing, you can look at the pop count of this card on all 4 major grading companies all at once here on one chart. I mean, just really, really valuable data. Look at the pie chart the donut chart on this one. It's all PSA, ultra modern. I mean, this is the trend of the hobby today. PSA is just an absolute behemoth, getting 90% of the submissions on this card. SGC getting about 10%. I mean, Beckett and CGC not even really registering on the donut. Here's the grade distribution from PSA for this card. Basically half 9s and half 10s with a few scattered lower than that. And last example we'll do is a vintage card, 1968 Topps Nolan Ryan and Jerry Kuzman rookie. And the Universal Pop Report is actually the most valuable for vintage because, with modern, cards are all 9s and 10s. But with vintage, it's very spread out. You can have vintage cards being 1s all the way through 10s, and it's much more sort of valuable to know, hey, I have a PSA 6 of this card. Where does that sort of land in the hierarchy of things? Here's the pop count data for all 4 major grading companies on one chart, Universal Pop Report. And let's say you had a PSA 6 copy of this card, or an SGC 6, any 6. And you could look down here and say, okay, there's been 3,000 copies of the card graded a 6 by one of the 4 major grading companies. That's about 12% of all the cards graded. And about 19% of the copies graded are higher than that. And you can get the total numbers, and this is just all really, really useful data if you're a card nerd like me. The donut chart shows roughly 2/3 of the copies of the card graded are by PSA, maybe 20% to SGC, 10% Beckett, something like that. Here's that same data, but in a bar chart. Bar chart? I think it's a bar chart. Here's the distribution of grades, also in a bar chart, assuming I'm using the term bar chart correctly. Sort of like a bell curve distribution with the peak at 4. You can see the card has been graded at PSA 4 more than any other grade, but 5 and 6 are right near there as well. The Beckett distribution, look at that. It's just a straight mountain up and down. That's sort of a pretty uniform distribution, with the center being a 5 from Beckett. I don't know how really to analyze that data, other than that is a really, really uniform, up mountain and then down mountain with a peak at 5. SGC distribution is a little more scattered. You can see SGC, I guess, doesn't give out half grades as regular as full grades. It makes sense, and that's certainly what this data shows here. As you can see, like a lot more 3s, 4s, and 5s than 3.5s, 4.5s, 5.5s, etc. Anyway, I'm just sort of showing random data at this point, but I went down the rabbit hole of fun with sports card data on GemRate earlier today, and thought I'd share. But that's it. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and hope to see a whole bunch of you at Chantilly this weekend. Thanks, everyone.